Phoenix Shadow Streamer. Chapter 1. The night was like ink, and the lights of the palace in the depths of the palace swayed slightly. Wu Zaishan sat on the dragon chair with phoenix eyes, her breath as fierce as frost. She raised her hand slightly, her sleeves lifted, and a murderous wind was blowing. Does your majesty have to go against this palace? Her voice carries an unquestionable majesty, and every word is like a sharp blade, cutting into the night. His majesty frowned, took a step back in a panic, his fingers trembled, and he swallowed. I dare not. Wrong. Li Qing, where is Li Qing? The male protagonist of the three dynasties, Zai, suddenly rushed out. His steps were calm, his eyes were as sharp as a sword. He held his majesty's retreating body, and said in a deep voice, Your majesty, don't be afraid. His majesty seemed to have found a savior, tugging at the sleeve of the male protagonist, his voice so low that he was almost trembling. I am not cowardly at all, Li Qing, I authorize you to help me teach her a lesson. The wind in the palace was severe, and Empress Wu's eyes swept over the male protagonist like ice, but with a hint of disdain. She smiled slightly, and a flash of light flashed in her eyes. Oh, in that case, I want to see how long you can last. Chapter 2. The male protagonist straightened his waist, his eyes were cold, and he didn't take a step back. Xiaomuxi quietly appeared at the palace gate. She was wearing a plain white palace dress, holding a feather fan in her hand, with a faint light in her eyes, like frost flowers in the morning, crystal clear but deadly. Wu Haofeng seemed to be aware of her existence, and his eyes shrank slightly. Are you? Who? Xiaomuxi gently raised her feather fan, her voice soft but majestic. I am just a passing courtier. If your majesty needs it, this palace can do it for you. The hall was silent for a while, only the sound of swaying lights and faint footsteps echoed. His majesty secretly breathed a sigh of relief in his heart. He knew that if Xiaomuxi was by his side, Empress Wu's killing intent might be restrained. Wu Haofeng snorted coldly, his eyes searched with murderous intent, and the aura in the palace instantly condensed like ice. What a little palace maid, she actually dares to show off her power in front of this palace. Chapter 3. The male protagonist Zai smiled slightly, his eyes like a cold blade. Queen Feng, you have to be careful this time. Wu Haofeng did not show weakness, approaching step by step, and the wind rising from her sleeves brought the paper candles in the palace to flip. With a little finger, the air turned into a faint red light, like a sharp arrow pointing directly at the male protagonist's chest. Xiaomuxi waved her feather fan lightly, the light was like silk, smoothing the edge of the red light like water waves. She muttered secretly in her heart, Your majesty really needs someone to stabilize the scene, otherwise it is really possible that this Wu Zaishan will really knock over the entire dragon chair with a single palm. There was a slight metal collision sound in the hall, and the male protagonist Zai had prepared the hidden weapon in his sleeve and was ready to deal with emergencies at any time. The atmosphere was tense, as if it was about to explode in an instant. Chapter 4. His Majesty also raised his head at this time, sweating slightly on his forehead, and his voice trembled but with a reluctant majesty. Authorization. Wu Haofeng's eyes flashed with surprise. She didn't expect His Majesty to authorize others to do it to her at such a critical moment. This made her instantly furious, like fireworks, and the temperature of the entire temple seemed to rise accordingly. Xiaomuxi secretly calculated in her heart, this palace infighting is not only a contest of strength, but also a confrontation of psychology and strategy. Every look, every breath can change the situation. She took a deep breath, and a sense of psychological fulfillment welled up in her heart. This was her stimulating daily life. The male protagonist Zai was on the side, his eyes were like swords, ready to protect His Majesty at any time. Two different forces intertwined in the hall, creating a strange tension. Chapter 5. Wu Haofeng slowly retracted his offensive, and the killing intent in his eyes did not diminish. Okay, I want to see how long you can last. Xiaomuxi gently raised her feather fan and smiled. Queen Phoenix, if this is a battle of wits, let's see who makes the first mistake. The male protagonist Zai tightened his grip on the hidden weapon in his sleeve and said in a deep voice, Queen Phoenix, I do not seek a lasting victory, only a single strike. The wind howled in the hall, the candle light swayed like waves, and the three of them looked at each other. as if the entire palace was covered with an invisible layer of tension. The night is deep, and on the dragon throne and between the palaces, the conspiracies and schemes of the palace have just begun. Chapter 6. The aura in the hall was like solidified mercury. Wu Hofeng raised his hand slightly, and the thin iron wire hidden in his sleeve wriggled like a snake, attacking the male protagonist Zhe and Xiaomuxi. The male protagonist Zhe flashed and instantly escaped the fatal range, his eyes as cold as ice. Queen Feng, you are too slow. Xiaomuxi waved the feather fan lightly, the feather fan swept across the iron wire like water waves, dissolving the edge, and secretly calculated in her heart, today's palace fight is more complicated than yesterday, and every small action can be fatal. His Majesty was sitting on the dragon chair at this time, sweating profusely on his forehead, but he still tried to maintain his majesty. He coughed lightly and said in a low voice, Li Qing, hold on. The male protagonist nodded slightly, and the eyes of the two met briefly, and the tacit understanding was as sharp as a knife's edge. Xiaomuxi thought to herself, this kind of psychological confrontation is the most exciting, even if you lie flat, you can feel your heartbeat and adrenaline soaring at the same time. Wu Hofeng snorted coldly, his steps sliding like a ghost, and every time he stepped on the ground, it brought a faint energy wave. The candle light in the hall flickered, reflecting her cold phoenix eyes, which was chilling. Chapter 7. The night wind outside the hall roared in, and the candle light flickered on and on, reflecting on the face of the male protagonist Zhe, as cold as a knife. Empress Wu Feng suddenly laughed out loud, like the sound of ice cracking. Li Qing, do you think I have no one under my command? I saw 4 secret guards jumping out of the darkness, each holding a silver spear, pointing directly at the male protagonist Zhe and Xiaomuxi. Xiaomuxi gently waved the feather fan, which rotated like a streamer, blocking the first wave of attacks. She muttered secretly in her heart, this court struggle is far more cruel than the legend, and every move can be fatal. The male protagonist frowned slightly, the hidden weapon turned lightly in his hand, and the silver light was like a sharp sword, quickly repelling the secret guards. There was a sound of metal colliding in the hall, the sound was crisp and harsh, like ice crystals shattering. A cold light flashed in Empress Wu's phoenix eyes, and when she raised her finger, an invisible sense of oppression swept out, and even His Majesty couldn't help but take a step back. Chapter 8. His Majesty hurriedly grasped the edge of the dragon throne, his voice trembling but with a reluctant dignity, Mr. Li, I. The male protagonist sneered, his eyes were as sharp as steel, and he said lightly, Your Majesty, you don't need to worry. Xiaomuxi observed from the side, secretly shouting in his heart, 666, every judgment he made was suffocatingly accurate. Her psychological fulfillment soared instantly, and she quietly analyzed the movement trajectory of each secret guard, ready to help at critical moments. Unwilling to be outdone, Empress Wu Feng flew out a silver needle from her sleeve, carrying a faint energy wave, pointing directly at the male protagonist Zhe's throat. The male protagonist Zhe moved slightly, and the silver hidden weapon flashed like light, instantly resolving the crisis. The aura in the hall was as sharp as a blade, and every breath of the 3 of them affected the entire scene, like a war without gunpowder. Chapter 9. Wu Hofeng snorted coldly and retreated to the corner of the hall, his body as agile as smoke. In that case, this palace will fight you to the end. Xiaomuxi clenched her feather fan and secretly calculated in her heart, this war of wits and strength is not only a contest of strength, but also a competition of strategy and psychology. The male protagonist Zhe's eyes were sharp, the hidden weapon was turning lightly in his hand, and he approached Wu Hofeng step by step. Every movement brings a flow of air, like a sharp blade sweeping through the hall. His Majesty was sweating profusely on the dragon chair, but he still tried to stay calm and whispered, Li Qing, pay attention to the figure of the Phoenix Queen, her every move may bring unexpected threats. Xiaomuxi nodded secretly, full of mental activity, this is her daily adventure, even if she lies down, she can feel the ultimate stimulation and pleasure. Chapter 10. The flickering candlelight within the hall illuminated Empress Wu Feng's phoenix eyes, which shimmered like icy crystals, a chill that pierced the heart. Suddenly, Empress Wu Feng leaped up, her sleeves rising like black wings as she pounced upon the male protagonist. The male protagonist Zhe smiled slightly, and the hidden weapon shot, and the silver light passed through like a meteor, defusing the opponent's offensive. Xiaomuxi waved the feather fan beside him, and the light brought by the feather fan smoothed out the residual airflow like water waves. The wind howled in the hall, the candles swayed, and every collision seemed to hit the nerves of the viewers, and the psychological tension surged in the heart like a tide. His Majesty held his breath on the dragon throne, a flicker of panic in his eyes, but he still gritted his teeth to maintain his dignity. Li Qing, be careful. The male protagonists Zhe and Xiaomuxi had a tacit understanding in their hearts. This is a battle that must be fought with all their might, and every second may change the situation. Underscore 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 un. Chapter 11. After Wu Houfeng landed, his eyes flashed slightly, and he retreated to the corner of the hall, with a sneer on his lips. You are really a natural good player. The male protagonist Zhe held the hidden weapon tightly, his eyes as cold as frost, and stepped closer. Queen Feng, you must give me an explanation for what happened today. Xiaomuxi held the feather fan and secretly shouted in her heart, 666, every attack and defense is extremely exciting. She noticed Wu Houfeng's every breath and every blink, analyzing her possible next move. His Majesty was sweating profusely on the dragon chair, but his eyes gradually became firmer. He knew that at this moment, trusting the male protagonists Zhe and Xiaomuxi was the only choice. The air in the hall froze, the candles flickered, and the eyes of the three of them intertwined, like three cold blades, intertwining the most tense moments of the palace infighting. Underscore 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 un. Chapter 12. Empress Wu frowned slightly, and the hidden weapon in her sleeve flew out again, flashing silver light. The male protagonist turned his feet and counterattacked with the hidden weapon. The two forces collided in the air, with a crisp and sharp sound. Xiaomuxi waved the feather fan lightly, the feather fan turned into a light wave, blocking the residual airflow, and she secretly calculated in her heart, this struggle is not only a clash of powers, but also a psychological game. His Majesty gripped the armrests of the dragon throne and whispered, Li Qing, Queen Feng may be powerful, but your devotion and loyalty will surely surpass hers. The male protagonist sneered, his eyes sharp as knives. Rest assured, Your Majesty. I never fear any challenge. Wu Houfeng's eyes flashed with a hint of unwillingness. She understood that today's opponent was far stronger than before, and she had to use all her strength to save face. Underscore 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 un. Chapter 13. The wind whistled in the hall, and the candle light flickered. The male protagonist Zhe approached like a tiger, and the hidden weapon flashed like a silver snake, and Wu Houfeng's attack was accurately deflected. Xiaomuxi observed calmly, and her psychological activities were full of fulfillment. Every attack and defense was like the ultimate mental game, and she carefully calculated every move and intention of Wu Houfeng. His Majesty retreated slightly on the dragon chair, cold sweat oozing from his forehead, but his gaze gradually relaxed. He knew that today's victory or defeat was in the hands of the male protagonists Zhe and Xiaomuxi. Wu Zetian snorted coldly, approaching step by step, and the chill reached the bottom of her heart. The killing intent in her eyes was as fierce as an ice blade, as if it was about to cut through the entire temple. Underscore 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 un. Chapter 14. The male protagonist, Zhe, gripped his hidden weapon tightly, his eyes cold as stars, and he inched closer to Empress Wu. Xiaomuxi's feather fan trembled slightly in her hand, yet with incredible power, it dissipated the remaining air currents. His Majesty whispered, Li Qing, hold steady. The male protagonist's lips curled slightly, his eyes firm, rest assured, Your Majesty, I know what to do. Empress Wu frowned slightly, then suddenly lifted her sleeves with both hands, and a flood of hidden weapons poured out. The male protagonist Zhe was not afraid, and met the attack with hidden weapons. In a flash of silver light, the two forces intertwined in the air, like meteors hitting the night sky. Xiaomuxi secretly shouted, 666, full of psychological fulfillment, every confrontation is extremely exciting. Underscore 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 un. Chapter 15. The candles in the hall flickered, reflecting Wu Houfeng's cold phoenix eyes and the male protagonist's resolute gaze. The male protagonist walked steadily, and the light of the hidden weapon and the feather fan intertwined, defusing Wu Houfeng's offensive one by one. His Majesty's forehead was oozing cold sweat, but his eyes gradually calmed down, and he secretly admired in his heart, Li Qing is really extraordinary. Wu Hofeng snorted coldly and retreated to the corner of the hall, his eyes were like frost, but with a hint of unwillingness. She whispered, "Okay, if you win this time, this palace will not let you go." Xiaomuxi smiled secretly in her heart, you can feel such a wonderful court struggle even if you lie flat, every second is the ultimate combination of psychological stimulation and adventure. Chapter 16. The morning sun shines through the high windows of the temple, and the golden pillars of light refract mottled light and shadow on the marble floor. Wu Hofeng retreated to the inner hall, but his eyebrows and eyes were still cold, like the cold snow on the top of the mountain, which could not be ignored. The male protagonists Zhe and Xiaomuxi stood in the center of the main hall, their shoulders slightly closer, their eyes vigilant and focused. The air in the hall froze, and the faint sound of the wind seemed to have murderous intent. Today, it won't be so easy. Wu Hofeng's voice came from the inner hall, with unquestionable coercion. Xiaomuxi clenched her feather fan and secretly calculated in her heart, this struggle is not only a contest of strength, but also a duel of wisdom and psychology. Her psychological fulfillment burst into an instant, and she was so excited that she was solving a very complex puzzle. His Majesty sat on the dragon chair, his hands clasped on the armrests, sweat oozing from his forehead, but a glimmer of hope flashed in his eyes. He knew that today's outcome would determine the balance of the situation in the court. Chapter 17. Wu Hofeng slowly walked out of the inner hall, her steps were light but with invisible coercion, and every step was like an ice blade landing. The hidden weapon in her sleeve shone silver, reflecting on the marble floor, emitting a cold light. The male protagonist leaned forward slightly, his hands were interlaced, and his eyes were as sharp as cold steel. Xiaomuxi stood aside, the feather fan raised slightly, and the light waves swirled in the air, forming an invisible barrier. Queen Feng, every action you make today has been counted in this palace. The male protagonist Zhe's voice is low and stable, with a coercion that cannot be ignored. Empress Wu snorted coldly, a flicker of resentment flashing in her eyes. She waved her sleeves and rushed forward, with hidden weapons surging like a tide, pointing directly at the male protagonist. The candle light in the hall trembled, and the light and shadow intertwined, as if even the air had solidified. Xiaomuxi secretly shouted in her heart, 666, this kind of offense and defense is too exciting, every moment is like the ultimate psychological game. Chapter 18. The aura in the hall was extremely tense, the male protagonist dodged the offensive, and the hidden weapon shuttled like a silver snake, accurately defusing every wave of killer moves. Wu Hofeng frowned slightly, approaching step by step, each step bringing strong energy fluctuations. Her phoenix eyes flashed like ice crystals, and her murderous intent approached the male protagonists Zhe and Xiaomuxi. Xiaomuxi waved the feather fan lightly, and the feather fan brought up light waves to resist the remaining energy waves. She secretly calculated in her heart, today's offense and defense are more complicated than yesterday, and every move is full of fatal risks. His Majesty clutched the armrest on the dragon chair, cold sweat oozing from his forehead, but his eyes gradually became firmer. He understood that today's victory or defeat was entirely in the hands of the male protagonists Zhe and Xiaomuxi. Chapter 19. Empress Wu Feng suddenly jumped up, her sleeves spread out like black wings, and hidden weapons flew towards the male protagonist like rain. The male protagonist Zhe had a fierce gaze, a hidden weapon to meet him, and the silver light flashed to resolve all the offensives. He approached step by step, his momentum like a tiger, steadily suppressing Wu Hofeng. Xiaomuxi waved the feather fan slightly, and the light waves brought out by the feather fan hit the air like water ripples, forming a barrier that dissipated the remaining offensive of Empress Wu. His Majesty was sweating profusely on his forehead, and his voice was trembling but firm, Li Qing, stabilize. Don't be held back by her. Xiaomuxi secretly shouted in her heart, this psychological tension is too exciting, every attack and defense makes people's hearts beat faster, and the psychological fulfillment is bursting. Chapter 20. After Wu Hofeng landed, a look of surprise flashed in her eyes. She didn't expect the male protagonist Zhe to be able to resolve the offensive so accurately. Yes, it is indeed a difficult opponent in this palace. The corner of her mouth curled up with a sneer, but not to be outdone. The male protagonist clenched the hidden weapon and said coldly, Queen Feng, you must give this palace an explanation today. Xiaomuxi gently waved her feather fan, and her psychological activities were full of fulfillment. This is the ultimate court duel, and every attack and defense is full of wisdom and psychological games. His Majesty sweated on his forehead on the dragon chair, but his eyes gradually calmed down. He knew that today's court situation would be decided by the male protagonists Zhe and Xiaomuxi. Chapter 21. The wind howled in the hall, and the candles flickered, reflecting the frost-like phoenix eyes of Empress Wu and the resolute gaze of the male protagonist. The male protagonist walked steadily, and the light of the hidden weapon and the feather fan intertwined, defusing Wu Haofeng's offensive one by one. Wu Haofeng snorted coldly and stepped back, with unwillingness in her eyes, but still remained calm. You won beautifully, but this palace will not admit defeat easily. Xiaomuxi secretly shouted in her heart, you can feel such an exciting psychological and power confrontation even if you lie flat. This is the most enjoyable daily life. His Majesty sweated profusely from his forehead, but a trace of admiration flashed in his eyes, and he whispered, Li Qing, this palace really didn't misjudge you. Chapter 22. Wu Haofeng frowned slightly, snorted coldly, and the hidden weapon in his sleeve flew out again, but the male protagonist Zhe was already prepared, and the hidden weapon was as accurate as steel. Xiaomuxi's feather fan was raised slightly, and the light waves turned into a barrier, completely blocking the residual energy waves. She is full of mental activity. This court struggle is more exciting than any adventure, and every second is filled with the ultimate combination of wisdom and danger. His Majesty sat on the dragon throne, sweat dripping from his forehead. His voice was low but firm, Mr. Li, the Queen's methods are unpredictable. Be careful. The male protagonist Zhe nodded slightly, his eyes as cold as steel. Don't worry, Your Majesty. I know my limits. Chapter 23. Empress Wu Feng suddenly used a hidden weapon to perform a special trick. The wind whistled in the hall, the candle light flickered, and the light and shadow intertwined like a surging tide. The hero Zhe flashed, his hidden weapon dispelling the incoming attack like a meteor. He advanced with the momentum of a tiger. Xiaomuxi waved her feather fan, and the light waves, like ripples on water, smoothed out the remaining air currents. Cold sweat streamed down His Majesty's forehead, but his heart gradually calmed. He knew that today's victory depended entirely on the hero Zhe and Xiaomuxi. Wu Haofeng's eyes flashed with surprise. She didn't expect the male protagonist to be so calm, and even her tricks could be solved. Chapter 24. The candle light in the hall flickered, reflecting every eye contact between the male protagonist Zhe and Wu Haofeng, and the tense atmosphere filled the entire hall like a tide. Xiaomuxi secretly shouted in her heart, 666, every attack and defense is like a mind game, and every second is full of ultimate excitement. His Majesty sweated profusely from his forehead, but his eyes gradually became firmer. He knew that today's victory or defeat would be entirely in the hands of the male protagonists Zhe and Xiaomuxi. Empress Wu Feng snorted coldly and stepped closer. The coldness in her eyes was as sharp as a blade, as if she wanted to cut the entire palace in half. Chapter 25. The male protagonist, Zhe, gripped his hidden weapon tightly, his eyes cold as stars, and he inched closer to Empress Wu. Xiaomuxi's feather fan trembled slightly in her hand, yet it held an uncanny brilliance, neutralizing any remaining attack. His Majesty whispered, Li Qing, hold steady. The male protagonist's lips curled slightly, his eyes firm, rest assured, Your Majesty, I know my limits. The wind howled in the hall, the candles swayed, and every collision seemed to hit the nerves of the viewers, and the psychological tension surged in the heart like a tide. Wu Haofeng's eyes flashed with a hint of unwillingness, and she murmured in a low voice, Okay, if you win this time, this palace will not let you go. Xiaomuxi smiled secretly in her heart, you can feel such a wonderful court struggle even if you lie flat, every second is the ultimate combination of psychological stimulation and adventure. Chapter 26. The wind outside the hall howled, the night was like ink, and the palace lights swayed, reflecting the palace into a maze of light and shadow. Wu Haofeng retreated to the inner hall, but the chill did not dissipate, and there was a faint but dangerous light like fireflies in his eyes. The male protagonist stood in the center of the main hall, holding the hidden weapon tightly, his eyes were as cold as steel, steadily suppressing the remaining threat. Xiaomuxi stood beside him, his feather fan raised slightly, and the light waves swirled in the air, resisting the residual energy fluctuations like water ripples. Queen Feng, your plan has been seen through in this palace. The male protagonist said in a low voice, his tone as steady as a rock. The corners of Wu Haofeng's eyes trembled slightly, but a sneer appeared on the corner of her mouth. Li Qing, your self-confidence will become your Achilles heel. Xiaomuxi secretly calculated in her heart, this court struggle is not only a duel of power, but also a pinnacle game of psychology and strategy, which may change the situation every second. The psychological fulfillment burst instantly, and she clenched her feather fan, ready to take action at any time. Chapter 27. Empress Wu approached slowly, her sleeves waving like black wings, and hidden weapons surged towards the hero like a tide. The candle light in the hall flickered, reflecting her cold phoenix eyes, and the murderous intent was like cold steel that penetrated people's hearts. The male protagonist retreated step by step, his hidden weapon flashing like a meteor, accurately defusing every wave of offensives. Xiaomuxi secretly shouted in her heart, 666, every confrontation is as exciting as a mind game. Cold sweat dripped down his majesty's forehead, his voice trembling but firm, Mr. Li, the queen's methods are unpredictable. Be careful. The male protagonist Zhe nodded slightly, his eyes as cold as steel, rest assured, your majesty, I know my limits. A trace of surprise flashed in Empress Wu's phoenix eyes, and she secretly estimated in her heart, this time, Li Qing's tacit understanding with the palace maid was unexpected, and every dodge and counterattack they dodged and counterattacked was terrifyingly accurate. Chapter 28. The wind roared like a tide within the hall, and the candle light flickered, illuminating the sharp gleam of each exchange of glances between the male protagonist Zhe and Empress Wu. Empress Wu waved her sleeves, and hidden weapons rained down like a meteor shower, a sharp metallic sound piercing the air. The male protagonist Zhe met the attack with both hands, a flash of silver light, precisely neutralizing the attack. Xiaomuxi gently waved her feather fan, the light waves smoothed out the residual airflow like water ripples, and secretly shouted in her heart, this psychological tension is simply suffocating, and every attack and defense is like the ultimate puzzle game. His Majesty held the handrail tightly, sweat beads rolled down his forehead, but his eyes gradually stabilized. He understood that today's victory or defeat was entirely in the hands of the male protagonist Zhe and Xiaomuxi. Wu Haofeng snorted coldly, a hint of unwillingness flashed in her eyes, and she whispered, okay, you won this time, but this palace will never admit defeat easily. Chapter 29. The night was dark and the air in the palace was chilling. The hero Zhe approached Empress Wu Feng step by step, his hidden weapon agile like a silver snake, neutralizing the remaining attacks one by one. Xiaomuxi's feather fan was raised slightly, and the light waves turned into a barrier, blocking the residual energy. She is full of psychological fulfillment, every attack and defense is like a psychological maze, and every second is full of wisdom and danger. Wu Haofeng retreated to the corner of the hall, his eyebrows tightened, and secretly calculated the next step in his heart. She understood that if she lost another round, her plan would face a complete collapse. His Majesty was sweating on the dragon chair, and his voice was low but firm, Li Qing, stabilize. Don't be held back by her. The male protagonist Zhe's eyes were like cold steel, and he nodded slightly, steadily controlling the battle situation. Chapter 30. Wu Haofeng suddenly used a trick, and the hidden weapon surged like a tide, fluctuating with strong energy. The male protagonist quickly responded, and the silver light flashed between the hidden weapons, defusing the offensive. Xiaomuxi's feather fan waved, the light waves calmed the residual airflow like water ripples, and she secretly shouted in her heart, 666, this confrontation of extreme psychology and strength made people's hearts beat faster and their psychological fulfillment burst. His Majesty's forehead was sweating, but admiration flashed in his eyes, and he whispered, Li Qing, this palace really didn't misjudge you. Wu Haofeng's eyes flashed with a hint of surprise, she didn't expect the male protagonist to be so calm, and even her tricks could be solved. Chapter 31. The candles in the hall flickered, reflecting every eye contact between the male protagonists Zhe and Wu Haofeng, as sharp as a blade. The male protagonist walks steadily, and the hidden weapon diffuses the offensive like a meteor, spreading the suppression momentum to the extreme with every step. Xiaomuxi's feather fan waved, and the light waves smoothed out the residual airflow like water ripples, bursting with a sense of psychological fulfillment. This is her favorite exciting daily life. His Majesty was sweating on his forehead on the dragon chair, but his eyes gradually calmed down. He knew that today's victory or defeat would be entirely in the hands of the male protagonists Zhe and Xiaomuxi. Empress Wu Feng snorted coldly. The coldness in her eyes was as sharp as a blade, as if she wanted to cut the entire palace in half. Chapter 32. The hero, Zhe, gripped his hidden weapon tightly and approached Empress Wu Feng. The radiant energy of his feather fan intersected with the hidden weapon, completely neutralizing the remaining attack. His Majesty whispered, "Li Qing, hold steady." The male protagonist Zhe smiled slightly, his eyes firm. "Don't worry, Your Majesty, this palace has its own measure." The wind howled in the hall, the candles flickered, and every collision hit the nerves of the viewers, and the psychological tension surged in the heart like a tide. Wu Haofeng's eyes flashed with a hint of unwillingness, and she whispered, "Okay, you won this time, but this palace will not let you go." Chapter 33. The morning light shines through the hall windows, reflecting on the moist marble, creating mottled light and shadow. Wu Haofeng retreated to the inner hall, but the chill in his eyes did not dissipate, with a faint threat. The male protagonists Zhe and Xiaomuxi stood in the hall, their understanding silent, their eyes as sharp as steel. The air in the hall was frozen, and every second was as sharp as a knife blade. Xiaomuxi secretly calculated in her heart, today's battle is not only a duel of strength, but also a pinnacle game of wisdom and psychology. Every second is full of excitement and danger. His Majesty's forehead was covered with sweat. His voice was low but firm. "Mr. Li, the Queen's tactics are unpredictable. Proceed with caution." The male protagonist nodded slightly, his eyes were like cold steel, and he was steadily in control of the situation. Chapter 34. The wind howled in the hall, and the candle light flickered. Empress Wu waved her sleeves, and hidden weapons rained down like a meteor shower, leaving behind a harsh metallic sound in the air. The male protagonist attacked with a hidden weapon with both hands, flashing silver light, accurately defusing the offensive, and approaching Wu Haofeng step by step. Xiaomuxi's feather fan waved, and the light waves resisted the residual airflow like water ripples, and the sense of psychological fulfillment burst into a burst of psychological fulfillment. His Majesty broke out in a cold sweat on his forehead, but his eyes gradually calmed down, and he understood that today's victory or defeat depended entirely on the male protagonists Zhe and Xiaomuxi. Wu Haofeng snorted coldly, a hint of unwillingness flashed in her eyes, and she whispered, "Okay, if you win this time, this palace will never admit defeat lightly." Chapter 35. The night was dark and the air in the palace was chilling. The hero Zhe approached Empress Wu Feng step by step, his hidden weapon agile like a silver snake, neutralizing the remaining attacks one by one. Xiaomuxi's feather fan was raised slightly, and the light waves turned into a barrier, resisting the residual energy, and the sense of psychological fulfillment bursting. Every attack and defense was like a psychological maze, and every second was full of wisdom and danger. Wu Haofeng retreated to the corner of the hall, his eyebrows tightened, and secretly calculated the next step in his heart. She understood that if she lost another round, her plan would face a complete collapse. His Majesty was sweating on the dragon chair, and his voice was low but firm, "Li Qing, stabilize. Don't be held back by her." The male protagonist Zhe's eyes were like cold steel, and he nodded slightly, steadily controlling the battle situation. Chapter 36. The candles in the hall flickered, reflecting the bottomless chill in Wu Haofeng's eyes. She slowly approached the male protagonist, and every step brought an airflow surging, as if compressing the entire temple to the extreme tension. The hidden weapon in the male protagonist's hand flashed slightly, his steps were steady, and his eyes were as cold as steel. He leaned forward slightly, breathing like a tide, ready to meet Empress Wu's final attack. Xiaomuxi waved her feather fan lightly, the light waves spread like water ripples, resisting the remnants of the offensive, and her psychological fulfillment burst with a sense of psychological fulfillment. This kind of extremely exciting offense and defense was more exciting than any adventure. His Majesty sat on the dragon chair, his hands clasped on the armrests, cold sweat oozing from his forehead, but there was a hint of determination in his eyes. He knew that today's victory or defeat was completely in the hands of these two loyal ministers. Wu Zetian snorted coldly and whispered, "Okay, Li Qing, let this palace see your limits." Underscore 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 un. Chapter 37. Wu Haofeng suddenly unleashed her ultimate move, sending hidden weapons from her sleeves cascading down like a meteor shower. A sharp metallic sound filled the air, causing the candlelight in the hall to flicker. The hero met the attack with both hands, a flash of silver light, precisely parrying the attack. He approached, his momentum pressing down on Wu Haofeng like a ferocious tiger. Xiaomuxi gently waved the feather fan, and the light waves brought out by the feather fan smoothed out the remaining energy fluctuations like water ripples. She secretly shouted in her heart, 666, every attack and defense is stimulated to the extreme, and every second is the pinnacle combination of psychology and strength. His Majesty's forehead was covered in sweat, but his eyes gradually calmed down. He whispered, "Li Qing, calm down. The queen has many tricks up her sleeve." Wu Haofeng's eyes flashed with a hint of surprise. She didn't expect the tacit understanding between the male protagonists Zhe and Xiaomuxi to be so terrifying. Underscore 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 un. Chapter 38. The candlelight in the hall flickered on and off, reflecting the shadows of the three people intertwined, and their breath was as fierce as ice blades. Wu Haofeng slowly approached, with every step with invisible coercion, as if to crush the entire temple. The male protagonist walked steadily, and his hidden weapon flashed silver light, defusing every offensive while approaching Wu Haofeng. Xiaomuxi's feather fan waved, and the light waves smoothed out the residual airflow like water ripples, filling with a sense of psychological fulfillment. His Majesty's forehead was sweaty, and his voice was trembling but firm. "Li Qing, pay attention to every subtle movement of the Phoenix Queen, she may fight back at any time." Empress Wu snorted coldly, her eyes filled with murderous intent as sharp as cold steel. She murmured softly, "Li Qing, you must admit defeat today." Underscore 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 un. Chapter 39. The male protagonist held the hidden weapon tightly and approached step by step, and the silver light shuttled like a meteor, completely defusing Wu Haofeng's offensive. Xiaomuxi's feather fan was raised slightly, and the light waves spread like water patterns, dissipating the residual airflow, and she was bursting with a sense of psychological fulfillment. This kind of ultimate offense and defense, every breath was like solving a puzzle. Wu Haofeng's eyes flashed with a hint of unwillingness, but there was no way to retreat. She waved her sleeves with both hands, and the final offensive came like a tide. His Majesty's forehead was sweaty, but his eyes were firm. He understood that today's victory or defeat depended entirely on the cooperation between Li Qing and Xiaomuxi. The male protagonist's eyes were like cold steel, approaching step by step, ready to push this palace struggle to a climax. Underscore 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 un. Chapter 40. Wu Haofeng's final blow was met and resolved by the male protagonist Zhe. The light waves of the hidden weapon and the feather fan were intertwined, and a crisp collision sound sounded in the hall, like ice crystals shattering. Xiaomuxi is full of psychological fulfillment. You can also experience such extreme excitement while lying flat, and every second is full of wisdom and danger. His Majesty's forehead was covered in sweat. His voice was low but firm. "Li Qing, Empress Feng has reached her limit. Proceed with caution." Empress Wu Feng retreated to a corner of the palace, surprise and resentment flashing in her eyes. She murmured softly, "Li Qing, you have won today, but I will return." The male protagonist's eyes are like cold steel, steadily controlling the situation, approaching step by step, within momentum like a tiger. Underscore 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 un. Chapter 41. In the early morning, the sun shone into the hall through the temple window, reflecting the candlelight and shadow with the figures of the three people. Empress Wu retreated to the inner hall, the coldness in her eyes still lingering, a faint sneer curling up at the corner of her mouth. She secretly thought, even though I lost today, I will definitely turn the situation around next time. The male protagonists Zhe and Xiaomuxi stood in the center of the main hall, tacitly speechless, their eyes as sharp as steel. The sense of psychological fulfillment soared after each attack and defense, and their heartbeats were closely synchronized with their breathing, as if the whole world was frozen. His Majesty sat on the dragon chair, sweat was oozing from his forehead, but his eyes were steady, and he said in a low voice, "Li Qing, this palace believes in you." Chapter 42. Wu Houfeng suddenly turned around, his eyes flashed with light, and the hidden weapon in his sleeve turned into an invisible storm and swept over, with devastating coercion. The hero spun around, his hidden weapon meeting the attack with a flash of silver light, precisely neutralizing the attack. He approached step by step, as imposing as a tiger, forcing Empress Wu to the corner of the palace. Xiaomuxi's feather fan waved, and the light waves turned into a barrier to resist the residual energy fluctuations. She is full of psychological fulfillment, and every attack and defense is like the pinnacle of mental games. His Majesty's forehead was sweating, but he secretly admired the tacit understanding between Li Qing and the palace maids, and he knew that today's victory or defeat was almost decided. Chapter 43. The candle light in the hall flickered, reflecting every eye contact between the male protagonist Zhe and Empress Wu Feng, as sharp as cold steel. Wu Haofeng's eyes flashed with unwillingness, and she whispered, "Li Qing, you won beautifully, but this palace will not admit defeat easily." The male protagonist held the hidden weapon tightly, approaching step by step, and the silver light shuttled through like a meteor, completely resolving the remnants of the offensive. Xiaomuxi waved his feather fan, and the light waves calmed the residual airflow like water ripples, and he was full of psychological fulfillment. His Majesty's forehead was sweaty, but his eyes were firm. He understood that today's victory or defeat depended entirely on the tacit understanding between Li Qing and Xiaomuxi. Chapter 44. The last attack of Empress Wu Feng was countered by the male protagonist Zhe. The wind was whistling in the hall, the candle light flickered, and the light and shadow intertwined into strange patterns. Xiaomuxi secretly shouted in her heart, 666, full of psychological fulfillment, every second is like solving the most complex puzzle. His Majesty's forehead was covered in sweat. His voice was low but firm, "Mr. Li, the Queen has reached her limit. Proceed with caution." The male protagonist Zhe's eyes were like cold steel, steadily controlling the situation, approaching Wu Zetian step by step. His momentum was like a tiger, and the tension of the entire temple reached its peak. Chapter 45. Wu Houfeng retreated to the corner of the hall, a trace of unwillingness flashed in her eyes, but she remained calm. She whispered, "Li Qing, you won today, but this palace will come back." The male protagonist held the hidden weapon tightly, his eyes were as sharp as steel, and he firmly controlled the situation in the audience. Xiaomuxi's feather fan was raised slightly, and the light waves spread like water ripples, completely eliminating the residual airflow. Psychological fulfillment, lying flat can also feel the ultimate stimulation in the battle of wisdom. His Majesty sat on the dragon chair, sweat on his forehead, but admiration flashed in his eyes, and he said in a low voice, "Li Qing, this palace really didn't misjudge you." Chapter 46. The morning light poured in through the windows of the palace, and the candle light in the hall was faint, reflecting the shadows of the three people intertwined like a maze. Wu Houfeng snorted coldly, a trace of surprise and unwillingness flashed in her eyes. She secretly calculated the next step, preparing to reverse the situation in the future. The male protagonists Zhe and Xiaomuxi stood in the hall, tacit understanding and speechless, full of psychological fulfillment. Every attack and defense was like a peak psychological game, and every second was full of wisdom and excitement. His Majesty's forehead was sweaty, but his eyes were steady, and he knew that today's outcome was almost decided. Chapter 47. Wu Haofeng suddenly turned, a gleam in her eyes. Hidden weapons swept in like a storm, bearing down with overwhelming pressure like a mountain. The male protagonist Zhe spun with his body, meeting the attack with hidden weapons. A flash of silver light flashed as he precisely parried the attack, closing in on Wu Haofeng. Xiaomuxi's feather fan waved, and the light waves resisted the remnants of the offensive like water ripples, bursting with a sense of psychological fulfillment. This is the ultimate confrontation between psychology and strength, making people's hearts beat faster every second. His Majesty's forehead was sweaty, but his eyes were firm, and he said in a low voice, "Li Qing, this palace believes in you." Chapter 48. The wind howled in the hall and the candlelight flickered, reflecting the sharp light of every eye contact between the male protagonists Zhe and Empress Wu Feng. Wu Haofeng's eyes flashed with unwillingness, but the final offensive had exhausted its strength. Her hands trembled slightly, and she whispered, "Li Qing, you won." The male protagonist held the hidden weapon tightly, approaching step by step. His eyes were like cold steel, and he was steadily controlling the situation. Xiaomuxi's feather fan waved, and the light waves calmed the residual airflow like water ripples, bursting with a sense of psychological fulfillment. This is the ultimate thrill and wisdom duel that can be enjoyed even when lying down. Chapter 49. Wu Haofeng retreated to the corner of the hall. A trace of unwillingness flashed in her eyes, but she remained calm. She whispered, "Li Qing, you won today, but this palace will come back." The male protagonist's eyes are like cold steel, steadily controlling the situation, approaching step by step, with momentum like a tiger. Xiaomuxi's feather fan was raised slightly, and the light waves spread like water ripples, completely dissolving the residual airflow. Psychological fulfillment. Every attack and defense is like a psychological maze, and every second is full of wisdom and excitement. His Majesty's forehead was sweating, but admiration flashed in his eyes, and he whispered, "Li Qing, this palace really didn't see you wrong." Chapter 50. The morning light shone through the high windows, and the hall was silent. Wu Haofeng retreated to the inner hall, although the chill in his eyes was still undissipated, but his defeat was obvious. She whispered, "Li Qing, you won today, but this palace will definitely come back." The male protagonists Zhe and Xiaomuxi stood side by side, their eyes intertwined, and they were speechless. The atmosphere in the hall gradually calmed down, and the candlelight flickered, reflecting their resolute and cold figures. His Majesty sat on the dragon chair, cold sweat oozing from his forehead, and admiration and reassurance flashed in his eyes. "Li Qing, today's victory will be remembered by this palace." The sound of the wind entered the room through the palace window, bringing a cool breath of early spring, and the entire palace temporarily returned to calm, but the bizarre story of court struggle still continued quietly in the dark. Xiaomuxi smiled secretly in her heart. You can feel such extreme excitement even if you lie down. Every second is the pinnacle experience of psychology and strength. Extra Chapter 1, Chess Game Under the Moon. The night was like ink, and the only candlelight in the palace illuminated the small chessboard. The male protagonist sat in front of the chess table, frowning slightly, and tapping his fingers lightly on the chess pieces, as if he could gain insight into the general trend of the world with every step. Xiaomuxi sat opposite. The feather fan was spread out on her lap. Her eyes flashed with mischievous light. She secretly thought to herself, the male protagonist Zhe actually saw the chess game so thoroughly, but he couldn't let go too much, otherwise the psychological fulfillment would not be enough. "Li Qing, you calculated this step well, but this palace has already expected it," Xiaomuxi said softly, with a teasing tone in his tone. The male protagonist raised his eyes and smiled slightly, with a little appreciation in his eyes. "Sure enough, Xiaomuxi, your mind is deeper than those ministers in the palace." The sound of chess pieces colliding echoed in the quiet night, and the psychological activities of the two were intertwined, both contested and like daily play, with every movement with a bizarre and wonderful rhythm. The moonlight shines on the chessboard through the palace windows, and the chess game is like a microcosm of life, shocking and interesting every step. Extra Chapter 2, The Tryst in the Imperial Garden. In the early morning, the Imperial Garden is filled with the fragrance of flowers, and the dew is crystal clear on the blades of grass. Xiaomuxi stepped lightly on the stone path, the feather fan was raised slightly, and the sense of fulfillment of psychological activities was bursting. This moment of sneaking out was more exciting than any court struggle. The male protagonist Zhe was already waiting under the flower stand, holding a folding fan in his hand. His eyes were quiet but sharp in his eyes to examine the world. "Xiaomuxi, how are the flowers blooming today?" the male protagonist asked in a low voice. His tone was as calm as a lake, but there were hidden waves. The corners of Xiaomuxi's mouth raised slightly, and she muttered secretly in her heart, this person is always serious, but in fact, he secretly enjoys this feeling of stealing half a day's leisure in his heart. She waved her feather fan gently, and the light waves were reflected on the dew, refracted into colorful light and shadow, as wonderful as a fairy tale. The two of them walked among the flowers, occasionally whispering, occasionally silent, their mental activities were full and strange, and every step was like walking in a bizarre dream. Underscore 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 un. Extra Chapter 3, Moonlight Secret Talk. Late at night, on the top floor of the palace. The moonlight shone through the corners of the eaves, reflecting the figures of the two elongated on the ground. Xiaomuxi leaned against the railing, the feather fan spread out, and her eyes flashed with excitement and curiosity. Li Qing, there are a lot of rumors in the palace this time, how will you deal with it? She asked softly, her mental activity was like a tide, she wanted to test and see the reaction of the male protagonist. The male protagonist Zhe clasped his hands, his eyes were like cold steel, and his voice was low but stable, Xiaomuxi, what needs to be dealt with will naturally be dealt with, but there are some things that you don't need to worry too about. Xiaomuxi smiled secretly in her heart, this is the feeling of lying flat and seeing the situation in the world, every psychological undercurrent is extremely exciting. The two stood side by side, and the shadows under the moonlight intertwined, forming a bizarre picture, which was not only a daily routine in the court, but also a subtle adventure in the depths of the soul.